Children make their way back to Children's Church. Again, I want to thank those who have put so much energy into today's church picnic as we celebrate the life of the Holy Spirit in our church. And I also want to remind everyone that you are invited. And so we look forward to spending time together after service. This morning's lesson follows on from last week in the Gospel of Mark. We're in the 3rd chapter of the Gospel of Mark, and it's there once again we see, shall we say, the full humanity of Jesus. Very often in the life of the church, we tend to play down the fullness of Jesus' humanity. We tend to assume that Jesus' persona was always meek and mild, gentle and reserved. Oftentimes we forget those contexts in which Jesus' behavior represents the full range of his humanity. You'll remember last week Jesus was angry in his grief over the Pharisees and how they had used the law to impose upon the people of God, and by doing so had taken advantage of them, showing them little compassion or empathy, paying no attention to how their rules landed on those who were below them. And so Jesus was full on angry. Well, today we meet Jesus once again having gone home. He's back home. And such was his fame by the time he returned home very early in his ministry that everybody in the town came pouring out. Everybody came pouring out to see him. So much so that when he arrived was the dinner hour and no one, because there were so many people thronging, could eat. And I'm kind of hoping it doesn't get too crowded after church today, because I certainly don't want to experience that. But people couldn't even eat. There were so many folks coming in to see Jesus. And so as Jesus arrives and the crowds are buzzing with his growing fame, his family shows up. His family shows up. And they are there because they have heard that he's lost it. He's lost it. Do you know what it means to lose it? It happens. We all just lose it sometimes. We are outside of ourselves. Something has gone on and it causes us to operate in a way that looks like it's beyond what we would normally do, and therefore people have questions about, are you okay? Well, Jesus' family come out to rescue him, to have what you might call an intervention on his behalf. Because he's been out there doing things that have been shocking to his own family. So much so that it's upset the powers that be. And they're worried about him, as they should be. Now, the diagnosis of the scribes is that the reason Jesus is operating the way that he is because he's possessed by a demon. Nobody would interrupt the norms of the community so egregiously as this unless the devil had a hold of them. Because we all know that whatever is customary is what is godly, right? Whatever's ordered is godly. Whatever's done in the way that things must be done is the holy path. It's the sacred way. And yet Jesus' behavior seems to be outside of all these norms, beyond how we normally do things. And so his family is rightly worried. But of course, Jesus resists this interpretation of his ministry. Jesus says, look, if the devil had made me do it, the devil cannot be divided against himself. A house divided against itself cannot stand. No, not at all. In fact, no one can enter the strong man's house and plunder it. It's easy for them to think he's lost it. But Jesus makes clear, far from having lost it, it is in fact the Holy Spirit that marks his being beyond himself, that has empowered him beyond himself, and the things that have taken place have brought him to act and to do those things that nobody thought anybody else should be about. And then he tells them what you need to worry about. Because any of the sins that any of us should perpetrate can be forgiven. But you need to be concerned that in what you have elected to do does not blaspheme the Holy Spirit. In other words, you need to make sure that your own desire to remain within those norms does not mean you've rejected the very work of the Spirit in your own midst. It means that if you remain in those norms, may be possessed of another spirit, but not that of the Holy Spirit. Now, this all seems just weird in a way, and it doesn't get any more normal as the situation progresses. He said all these strange things to this crowd, and in the midst of that strangeness, his mother and brother show up, and someone says, "Hey, your mama and your brothers are here." Now, you know when somebody's upset, they often call their mama in, call a family member in, hope that by calling them, it'll calm them down. And so they do. Your mother and brother are here. Jesus says, who is my mother? Who are my brothers? And then he says to those who are in his midst, behold my mother. Behold my brothers. It's probably been 15 years but I had the privilege to preside at a funeral some years ago where in the midst of our rightly celebrating the life of this gentleman who was probably, when he passed, in his early 80s. At that point in the service where we typically have a good word for the departed, where we eulogize the person who has died. Precisely at that time, I invited anyone else after the family had spoken to come forward and speak. And came down the aisle a gentleman who lived 3 states away from Virginia. When he introduced himself, he said he lived, I believe at the time, in South Carolina. And he had driven all the way from South Carolina up to Virginia to be here to honor this man. And why had he come to honor this man? Because this man had been, when he was a boy, a neighbor. Now, this was a surprise to his immediate family. They had no idea that this gentleman who was there eulogizing their father, they had no idea who he was. And yet this gentleman in his 50s came up and he acknowledged the importance of this man in his life. Because this man would take time from his own family from time to time, unbeknownst to anybody else, just to be outside with him and throw the ball. Throw the ball. Throw the ball. Nobody else knew about it. Jesus said, "Who is my mother and who are my brothers?" This man, even though it wasn't his kid, opened himself up to that child in those moments to be a dad. And it was transformational for that child to have someone who was willing to be that person. Even if it was just once or twice a week. Who is my mother? Who is my brother? You see, my friends, empathy, compassion, care, attention. These are the things that make for Jesus' invitation to be mother and brother. But it's impeded too often, far too often, by one thing. And that is fear. It is shocking the degree to which fear is the number one enemy of discipleship. Fear is the number one enemy of following Jesus. Our society has taught us to be concerned primarily with 2 values: security and privacy. If you don't believe me, have a look at how much money we spend on security and privacy. How hard do we work to ensure our security and privacy? I've told this story before, but I surveyed a Wednesday night Bible study group one night, and I asked them, Why is it that in the state of Virginia, young people, I'm not talking about the destitute, but young people can't seem to find a place to live that they can afford long enough to save enough money to get a place to live? They're like, what do you mean? I'm like, I'll tell you what I mean. Let's just raise our hand. Let's do it now. Raise your hand if you have one bedroom in your house. Just raise your hand. You got a bedroom in your house? How many's got 2 bedrooms in their house? How many's got 3 bedrooms in your house? How many's got 4? How many of you can sleep in all 4 of those at the same time? And here we are as the children of God, the people of God, with family all around, as we say. And yet we haven't even created the institutions to ensure that we can manage all of this excess hospitality for young adults for just short terms. Why? I ask them. Why? Well, we're not sure that that's safe. Really? That's your worry? Well, our privacy could be invaded. Perhaps. But I keep reading through the Bible and I can't find where Jesus elevated privacy and security above empathy, compassion, attention, and kindness. I keep looking, but I can't find it. But we've certainly, in fact, it's so deep with us we don't even notice the degree to which it's true about us. I was in a conference yesterday, and the author of the book that we were looking at, called Leadership in the New Science, was talking about fear. She referred to fear as that one emotion that is rooted in our primal instincts. I call it our lizard brain. Because when people are fearful, they resort to one of 2 options. They either run away or they fight. When people are fearful, that's what they resort to. Because they're fearful, they're not trusting, they're not believing, they're not confident in. They are scared. And so they double down on their security and privacy. They double down in their reactions, and they either want to fight or they want to run away. And it's so interesting that Jesus, confronted by a demoniac running out of a graveyard, neither fights with the man, he doesn't pick up a stick and goes, "Get away from me," nor does he run away. He stands there and encounters the man and seeks his best in that moment. And I worry that our lizard brain takes over too often. And when it does, as our seminar leader suggested yesterday, it presses out empathy. It presses out compassion. It pushes out attention. It pushes us away from kindness, the very core virtues of our life together as a church. In fact, it's so true of us that sometimes we retranslate our fear so we don't have to acknowledge it. We call it being reasonable. Oh, a reasonable person wouldn't do that. Those aren't reasonable steps. It wouldn't be reasonable to do those things. Where in the gospel does Jesus appear to be reasonable? We don't worship a God of rationality and reasonable. We worship a God of hope, of love, and of justice. A faithful God who never lets up on our behalf. And so here's the point. Jesus is not saying, he's not saying, reject your family in exchange for other family. It's not what he's saying. He's saying, be unto others as family, like your family. Open up the doors to others as family, like family. Be to one another like brothers and sisters. Yes, brothers and sisters quarrel. Yes, brothers and sisters don't always see eye to eye. He's not in here right now. I got two that are 13 months apart. Lord help us. You talk about going at it, but mess with one of them. Just mess with one of them and see what happens. You see. And that's who we are to one another. And that's who we are to others. Jesus is inviting us to open up and become family beyond our family to others. To extend the empathy, compassion, love, and attention and play. You can't do it for everybody, but you can do it for more than just those who are in your nuclear circle. I'll say this and quit. Statistically, and I've said it before, statistically, Virginia is one of the worst states in the Union in moving children from foster care to another option before they reach 18. One of the worst. We're number 49, or we were 2 years ago. So much so that we have dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of children becoming 18 and leaving the foster system with very little support. Very little support, if any. Just like falling off a cliff. Now there are groups, organizations who have taken this difficulty seriously, and they're finding ways for families to adopt 18-year-old foster children. They're not adopting them, but they're coming alongside. They're coming alongside these children as family. And many of these organizations are asking the churches to come alongside the families that are coming alongside the children who are falling off the cliff. Strikes me as something we ought to do. Strikes me as something we could do. Strikes me as something we will do. But you see my point. There are people all around us who are extending family, calling one brother or sister. Jesus says, who is my brother and who's my mother? The one that does the will of God. What's the will of God? To extend your family. To broaden ourselves beyond ourselves for the sake of others. That's the invitation. That's the calling and blessing of being in the family of Jesus. Is that the family is quite remarkable. Nobody in Jesus' family needs to operate out of fear. And nobody where the Son of God is hosting the party need be fearful. Nobody. Nobody. Amen. In just a